All right, maybe we can get started. Hello, everyone. Good morning. So welcome to our cyber training webinar. And my name is Zhe Zhang. I'm assistant professor in the Department of Geography at Texas A&M University. And today we have Dr. Laurie Peak to give us a presentation on the topic of the future disaster research workforce, the CONVERGE training modules for ethical, scientifically rigorous research. So Dr. Laurie Peak is the director of the Natural Hazard Center and professor in the Department of Sociology at the University of Colorado, Boulder. And Dr. Peak earned her bachelor degree in sociology from Ottawa University, and she had a master education from Colorado State University and a PhD in sociology from the University of Colorado, Boulder. And she served as the president of the Research Committee on Disaster for International Sociology Association, and she is the past chair of the American Sociological Association section on environmental sociology. And she is a principal investigator of the National Science Foundation funded CONVERGE facility. So you will hear about that today. And the Social Science Extreme Events Research Network. And she wrote a lot of books. So she is the author of the award-winning book Behind the Backlash, Muslim Americans After 9/11, and co-editor of Displaced Life in the Katrina Diaspora and Handbook of Environmental Sociology, and co-author of The Children of Katrina and Continuing Storm, Learn from Katrina. And she has received 12 awards for her teaching and mentoring, including the Board of Governors Excellent Undergrad Teaching Award and Outstanding Postdoctoral Mentor Award. So I think that Dr. Peak absolutely serves as a role model for all researchers in the disaster management research community, and she has made so significant contribution to our understanding of disaster impacts and help socially vulnerable communities to recover from extreme disaster events. So I'm so honored to have Dr. Peak here to give us the webinar. So let's welcome Dr. Peak again, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that warm and generous introduction. That means so much to me. And congratulations to you on the success of receiving this incredible National Science Foundation Award that has brought this webinar series forth and brought us together. And just really thank you so much for inviting me. And thank you to everyone who's logged on this morning. I wonder if you're out there in the cyber world right now, if you could put in the chat, where are you calling in from this morning? So I'm going to put in here, I am calling in from Boulder, Colorado. And I'd love to hear where the rest of you are. Oh, somebody from Maine. Welcome, Katrina. Great to see you. I figured there would be a lot of College Station and Bryan, Texas participants on here. So great to see the Texans on here as well. That was somebody from Missouri. Welcome, Ethan. I grew up in Kansas, neighbor to your east side, or west side, excuse me. Oh, and Brandon from Los Angeles. It's very early for you, so thanks for being here. So welcome, everybody. It is great to see you. And I know we only have 50 minutes this morning. And so I am going to go ahead and share my screen and share the presentation that Dr. Zhang asked me to put together for today. But what I would ask is, I'm going to reserve time at the end for questions and discussion. And so if anything comes up during the presentation, either related to the presentation or just anything else about the sociology of disasters that you might like to cover, I would love to discuss that with you. And as Dr. Zhang said, I'm actually going to talk today about one of our major National Science Foundation funded initiatives, the CONVERGE facility. But before I do that, I actually wanted to put a word in about the Natural Hazard Center, which is located in the Institute of Behavioral Science at the University of Colorado Boulder. And the Natural Hazard Center is one of the nation's oldest social science-led hazards and disaster research centers. And this project that Dr. Zhang is leading is really about, at its core, using cyber infrastructure and geospatial analysis to, quote, address societal challenges related to climate change and disaster management. And so I understand that there may be some people on this webinar who are real experts in the cyber infrastructure space, in the geospatial analysis space, but you may be moving more into this climate change and disaster space. And so that's why I'd like to invite you to visit the Natural Hazard Center website, to sign up for our alerts, publications, webinars, all the resources that we create through the Hazard Center, because for nearly 50 years now, the Natural Hazard Center has served as the nation's NSF designated information clearinghouse for the societal dimensions of hazards and disasters. And so at the Natural Hazard Center, we're really committed to advancing research, building connections, training and mentoring a next generation in order to reduce the harm and suffering from disasters. And so we have a lot of resources available. We host a big annual natural hazards workshop in Colorado every summer. That is a great place to come and sort of get a download on what's happening in the hazards and disaster community. And I think Dr. Zhang may put a link in the chat, because there's actually an opportunity for some funded travel to attend the workshop and be a part of a very special cyber infrastructure training that we're going to hold this summer in partnership. So thank you for checking out the resources and signing up for updates. I'll look forward to seeing your names and emails hopefully coming through. So I want to start with sort of a more general piece of advice, I think, for life and our professional work that we do, but also Dr. Zhang, some of this presentation today, I have really geared toward this new cyber training grant and the facility that you are so expertly getting off the ground. Because I know when I was going to start Converge, one of my mentors asked me the question. They said, whenever you're trying to write a grant proposal or start a new project, one of the most important questions you need to ask is, what is the problem you are trying to solve? Because lots of people have good ideas, they want to create things, they want to build things, but what is that problem that you're trying to address, or what is the gap you're trying to fill? And I really appreciated that I was asked that question at the grant proposal writing stage early on, because it really forced me to think through, there are obviously many, many problems that are driving rising disaster losses and are leading to increased harm and suffering in so many of our communities. And so being asked this question really forced me to sort of step back and think about the different components of Converge that I was proposing, and what were the different problems that I was trying to solve through putting this proposal forward. And so I'm going to talk about today one key element of Converge that is trying to solve one particular problem or address an opportunity, which is to ensure that the disaster research workforce is prepared with the requisite skills and knowledge. In 2006, a really important National Academies report was released on the status of social science research in the hazards and disaster field, and it had a couple of really important chapters on the social science workforce. And one of the questions that was raised in that Academies report was, is the social science community large enough? Do we have enough people doing the work? And do they have the skills and knowledge that is going to be needed given the 21st century challenges that we know we are going to address? And I read that report soon after I graduated from my PhD program, and I was very influenced by many dimensions of it, the research agenda they set, but also the thinking around the workforce and what are we doing to support the next generation. And so this was one of the key thrusts of the Converge facility, really trying to figure out how can we do that and do that better, because I've been in this field for more than 20 years. And every single day I think about disasters, and every single day I am thankful to be able to do this work, because I think we work with some of the best people in the world because they're trying to make a difference. And so what are the specific challenges that some of the specific challenges we're trying to address across the Converge facility, not just with our training modules that I'm going to talk about today, but also with other elements of Converge, such as we have research coordination networks that are bringing together engineers, natural scientists, social scientists, public health researchers, and others across disciplines and within disciplines to coordinate our research and enhance it. So why are we doing these things? So one big challenge is we know that historically, disaster research has been highly event-driven. A big event happens and it really serves as sort of a force function, bringing people into the field. But with that event-driven nature of the field, we know that what sometimes happens is there may be an influx of researchers who don't know about the decades and decades and decades of accumulated knowledge that is out there. We also know that communication and coordination issues oftentimes emerge in large-scale disasters, both because sometimes there are technological failures, but also sometimes because in that rush to enter the field, that there isn't always the time that is needed for people to fully communicate and coordinate. And then what happens in response? Sometimes there are ethical breaches and cultural missteps that happen when people are studying across boundaries that they may not fully have time to develop an awareness of. There are collaboration gaps that then lead to this, what I call the repeated findings problem, where we keep finding the same thing again and again and again, disaster after disaster, which is important in terms of scientific replication, but it can be problematic if we're engaging in duplication of effort, when that coordination and collaboration could actually reduce duplication, reduce respondent burden, and instead we could enhance collaboration. And so what does this all mean? With every challenge, the flip side is an opportunity for us to come together and to work across disciplines, sectors, organizations in the field to do something about this. So some of the things we're trying to do through Converge and the various incredible research networks that are under the Converge umbrella include identifying researchers before a disaster by discipline and by expertise. And these may be researchers who have been long-standing in the field, as well as newcomers, students who may have an interest, think, I might want to do field research one day or get involved. How do I do that? And so we want to identify researchers in advance. But we also know if after a disaster, researchers start studying these events, how can we cultivate, train, and support those who are new to the field to keep them in this field? Because I think that's something that's made the disaster field so vibrant over time, is the influx of new people with new perspectives. And so how do we do this? There are so many opportunities for continuing to develop academic and interorganizational collaborations, setting disciplinary and interdisciplinary scientific agendas that have a real convergence framework that is problem-focused and solutions-based, which is really the scientific core of the Converge facility. And then, of course, always, 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 I think one of the things I love the most about the hazards and disaster field is this unapologetic commitment to applied research. That when we do work, it's about making sure that that new knowledge that is gained, that it is applied and turned into action through practice or policy, for example. And so what is Converge? Those are some of the challenges we're trying to address and some of the work that we're trying to do. So Converge is a National Science Foundation shared use facility, and we're actually part of the Natural Hazards Engineering Research Infrastructure. Some of you may have heard of NERI. NERI is a network of more than a dozen shared use facilities located across the United States. There are actually 2 right there in the great state of Texas, where I know many of you are. And Converge is the only social science-led facility in the larger NEARI network. And so it has been great to be able to be a part of this much larger network and to work again across disciplines. And we're really dedicated at our core to advancing the ethical conduct and scientific rigor of convergent hazards and disaster research. And I hope you'll please go to the Converge website as well and check out our resources and also sign up for updates there, because we offer a lot of resources and other things through Converge as well. So one of our we have 5 major tasks through Converge, and one of the major tasks is related to this commitment to develop free resources to help train a diverse next generation of the hazards and disaster workforce. And we are really committed to a diverse next generation. And when I use the word diversity, I want to be really clear about how I define diversity. I really think of diversity as sort of two-pronged. What we talk about oftentimes is socio-demographic diversity, which is absolutely vital. We know there is abundant research that shows that socio-demographically diverse teams, so teams that involve people from different gender backgrounds, race and ethnic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, age ranges, they tend to make better decisions. And I bet all of you can understand why that is so. When we have more diverse people and diverse minds and diverse perspectives in a room, we can make better and more informed and holistic decisions. And so one thrust of diversity, we're talking about socio-demographic diversity and cultivating that. But we're also talking about what in the literature is referred to as functional diversity. And functional diversity refers more to those sort of hidden characteristics that you may not be able to as easily to spot or to see. And so these refer to things like maybe somebody's life experiences, their educational background, their history, and that kind of knowledge that they bring and perspective that they bring into a field. So we're trying to cultivate demographic and functional diversity in the hazards and disaster field and to get resources into their hands. And so one of the major resources that we have created over the past 5 years are the CONVERGE Training Modules series. And these are free, interactive online trainings that are designed predominantly, our audience is for students, early career professionals, and others who are new to the hazards and disaster research and practice. And we're really committed in these modules. We do take an all hazards approach. So while natural hazards are really kind of the core of the modules, we bring in cases from public health emergencies, from technological disasters, and from terrorism and acts of mass violence. So we work across the hazards and disaster spectrum. We also, it's social scientists, public health researchers, engineers, and people from other disciplines who've helped co-create these with us. And so while I would say the core of the literature that we draw on in these modules is largely social science knowledge, we do try to bring in those key perspective and case examples from other disciplines. I want to pause here for all of those who are kindly listening to this webinar. If you have taken one or more CONVERGE training modules, would you just put a note in the chat and let me know if you've ever logged on and completed one of these modules? It would be great to know of this audience of if anybody has actually taken advantage of these modules. And so every module in the series has learning objectives, lessons plans, case studies, additional resources that you can follow up. So for example, data sets, websites, as well as we always include an annotated bibliography for every single module, because these are evidence-based. They are grounded in the literature. And then we have a final quiz for every one of these that if you pass it with 8 out of 10, you actually get a contact hour. If you're an emergency manager out there, this can count towards your general management training. If you're not an emergency manager, but you're a professor or a student, these have been used in a lot of classes because a lot of times professors will just require these and then students just have to upload their completion certificate. And so I want to pause here again for Dr. Zhang and say this, that we spend a lot of time not only thinking about our why for the training, why are we doing these trainings, what do we want to achieve? We also spend a lot of time thinking about the who, who is the audience for this? And you can see in the very first sentence there, I lead with who is the audience, because these training modules would look very different, right? If we had geared these towards the most senior professionals in our field, or if these were written only for policymakers and trying to influence policy change. And so this is just another sort of general tip to anybody out there who's building a new training program, or really any program or initiative in general. Always know who your audience is, because if you do not clearly identify your audience, you're probably not going to have the impact, and you're sure not going to be able to measure it, that you might potentially could have if you had really spent some time thinking about who's the audience. Because trust me, there's a world of work that needs to be done. No one person or no one team can do all of that work, but when we get clear on our why, our who, and then our how are we going to carry this out, that can really take us a long way in achieving our goal. And are we solving all the problems with these? No, but are we moving the needle just a little bit? As I'm going to share in a minute, I do think so, because we have evaluated these modules. And so, plug on the modules. Since July of 2019, we started working on these in 2018, but we released our very first one on social vulnerability and disasters, was our first one to roll out, a topic so near and dear to my heart, in July 2019. And since then, just a couple weeks ago, we rolled out our 12th training module focused on Indigenous sovereignty and disasters. And so you can see we also have modules on ethical considerations, collecting and sharing perishable data, cultural competence, disaster mental health, conducting emotionally challenging research, gender-based violence in fieldwork, IRB procedures, positionality, public health implications of disaster research, and reciprocity in research. So in total, those are our 12. And these have been funded by the National Science Foundation, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the U.S. Geological Survey, which we are so grateful for, because that's really strengthened the perspectives. And I just want to put another plug in. If you're out there and are thinking, wow, I wish you had a module on X, Y, or Z, please know we're always taking ideas for those. And I would love to hear from you if there's another module you're interested in. So as I mentioned, we have the 12 modules, and as we've developed more and more of these, we ended up dividing them into foundational module topics. What do we hope that every person who's new to this field and thinking about conducting field research in hazards and disasters, what do we wish they knew? And so those are our foundational trainings. And then we also have these advanced training module topics. And so while we have 12 modules on 12 diverse topics, they do share certain themes, cross-cutting themes that we've been very intentional about integrating and weaving in to every single module. So these include things like a real consideration. This is how you know you have a sociologist who's talking to you right now, to social stratification and inequality. We know that disasters are not equal opportunity events. They do not affect populations or places equally. And so with that, we need to bring that lens to understand the inequitable or disparate impacts of disasters and what's driving that. We also bring in a lens of looking at power differentials, research ethics, methods, interdisciplinary collaboration and convergence, data management and use, and then the practical applications of research. We end every module with what are the next steps? What are the practical things that you can do with this? And so our core training module team includes myself, and then the wonderful Candace Evans, who is a graduate student, and also wonderful Rachel Adams, who started as a postdoc at the Hazard Center, but is now a full-time research associate. And we've worked together from the beginning. But in addition to the three of us who conceptualize and work on all the modules, I am so proud that over the years, we have worked with dozens and dozens of other collaborators across disciplines, across fields, at every career stage, from undergraduate students to very, very senior scholars who have joined us. And the way we identify the modules is some of them I wrote out in the grant proposal that I knew needed to be created. But over the years, sometimes I'll meet somebody, hear from a professor, meet graduate students who are doing something really fascinating. And I'll say, hey, would you want to join our team for the next couple of months and work together to create a module? And that has just been absolutely amazing to have these collaborations and to be able to co-learn with these great people. So really want to acknowledge them too. So now what I want to do, as I mentioned, we've got the 12 modules. They're all free. They're all online. You can access any of them. But today, during this brief webinar, I just want to give a brief overview of a couple of the modules to kind of give you a sense of what is the core content, how do the modules function, and even kind of a snapshot of what do they look like. And so I'm going to start because I know that, again, societal challenges are at the root of Dr. Zhang's grant. And again, trying to use cyber infrastructure and geospatial analysis to address some of the grand societal challenges related to climate change and disasters. And with my lens as a sociologist, one of the grand challenges that I am constantly thinking about is, again, those related to those unequal impacts and unjust impacts of disasters. And we know that the groups who are most economically and socially marginalized are on the basis of age, income, race and ethnicity, ability, health issues, immigration status, and many other fractures that oftentimes exist within society. These are the groups that oftentimes have the hardest time preparing for disasters. They may not have the resources, the networks, the connections. And then that means that they're oftentimes the most exposed, the most impacted, and then experience the most protracted recoveries. And so what the social vulnerability module does is it really gives an overview of the state of knowledge on social vulnerability and disaster research, which is decades of knowledge. Excuse me. And it also talks about what are the added considerations. I'm sorry, I'm going to take a drink of water. What are the added considerations to help empower and capacitate these populations and to work directly with the skills and knowledge of these populations? And so in the module, we highlight data, resources, and tools that are needed to conduct research in this area. And so this is a really great module if you're not a social scientist, for example, but are thinking about, in my engineering models, how might I integrate a social vulnerability perspective? And a real story from this, when we were launching this very first module, we were very eager to get feedback, and we always have lots of people review these modules, undergraduate students, graduate students, as well as doctoral level researchers. And with this very first module, we were very fortunate. There was a cohort of about 20 National Science Foundation students, funded students who were in a research experience for undergrads program. And so we invited them all. We said, this is our first module. Will you review this? And they were great. As undergraduates, they gave us so much amazing feedback that has really shaped the trajectory of the modules. So they said things like, it's hard to keep our attention for 30 or 60 minutes. Why don't you embed evaluation, little quizzes throughout, or little case studies to keep us engaged? And so that helped make the modules more engaging. But one of the undergraduates who was on there, he was actually an engineering student, I believe at Rice University. And he said, Lori, I'm doing this debris management project and I have all this sort of physical data, but I never thought about that I should also map the overlay of the community where the debris is landing. And then with these social vulnerability data sets that you've highlighted in here, I'm actually going to do a whole overlay of where the socially vulnerable populations and how does that relate to time to debris clearance. And so it's just like one of these amazing what we're trying to achieve with these modules. We also have a module on reciprocity in research. And so this is very important, whether you're doing field research, any kind of research, to really pause, what we define as pause, engage in a practice of reflection, relationship building, and mutually beneficial exchange between researchers and then your partners or participants. So again, in the social sciences, we oftentimes we are working with human participants who we're interviewing, surveying, et cetera. But even if we're not doing so-called human subjects research, oftentimes our research is only made possible when we're able to access data, to have partnerships with organizations. And so the reciprocity module is trying to get people to really think about how that we have this ethical obligation to work to produce mutual benefits for the people involved with or affected by the research process. And we really acknowledge and give lots of examples in this module of the unique context of every study and how that determines what a reciprocal relationship really should look like. And we give specific examples in this module to get researchers thinking about, okay, so you're doing a study. How can you make sure it's mutually beneficial? And so some examples that have come out of the literature, of course, sometimes people pay participants, so they offer compensation. But we also know that there are lots of other ways that you can be reciprocal. So it may involve things like offering training. So you have skills and knowledge. Can you give that back to the community or the agency that's partnering with you? Engaging in cultural preservation activities, or even providing research resources such as returning the data to the community, the findings or other information that can be of use. Because there's nothing more heartbreaking than hearing a community say, you know what, researchers came in, they collected data, we never saw them again. We don't know what happened. And so the reciprocity module is really about closing that loop and helping people to understand that when we develop those stronger relationships, it can actually strengthen the entire research enterprise. Another module that we developed is this module on collecting and sharing perishable data. And so perishable data is so key to so much disaster research. So this idea that data is going to disappear rapidly. And so we must collect it before it physically degrades. So if you're collecting soil samples or water samples, it literally may physically degrade. People's memories may fade or be reshaped. So there are all these reasons that we try to collect perishable data, but we know that it also introduces unique challenges in our field. And so these include things like there are real time pressures and there's data complexity. Rapid data collection is required, but people may not be familiar with what data is out there. They may have data access issues, or they may be overloaded with data and trying to process it in a very short period of time in order to get it back to an end user. We also know there are power and resource gaps that sometimes outside researchers land in culturally unfamiliar contexts. There are emotional challenges that come with this kind of research. And also there can be real coordination complications related to trying to collect perishable data. And so in the module, and we do this in a lot of the modules, because we're synthesizing so much published literature and putting that into a training framework, what we have done is oftentimes we introduce new synthetic definitions as part of the modules. And so one of the things that we recognize in the module is that collecting perishable data requires thoughtful attention to our ethical principles and our collective responsibilities to participants, to our discipline itself, and to other researchers in the field. And so we define perishable data as this highly transient data that may degrade in quality, be irrevocably altered, or be permanently lost if it's not collected soon after it is generated. Perishable data includes ephemeral information that exists before, during, or after a disaster that, if gathered, can characterize pre-existing hazardous conditions, near miss or actual disaster events, and longer-term recovery processes. And it may need to be perishable data. Well, historically, it has often been sort of collecting one point in time right after a disaster. One of the things we recognized in reviewing the literature and what's been happening in the field, that we may need to collect perishable data at multiple points in time across varying geographic scales to actually accurately characterize exposure susceptibility to harm and coping capacity. And you can see at the bottom of this and some of the other slides, I put a publication link. One of the things that have come out of these modules, because the modules themselves are free and online, but we spend so much time reviewing the literature and working on the modules that we're also really committed to turning the work into peer-reviewed publications, because again, we're doing so much synthesizing of core bodies of knowledge. And so this is a recently published article in Disasters where we synthesize that state of knowledge. One more module I was going to share today is related to broader ethical considerations. And so for those of you out there who conduct, again, so-called human subjects research, you know that you must receive institutional review board approval before launching a study. But one of the things that we know, and from reading the literature, is that IRBs, they mostly focus on the research design stage. What are you going to do? How are you going to protect participants from harm? And this is absolutely vital to encourage researchers to think through these issues in advance. But we know that once a study is approved by the IRB, the IRBs only require researchers to really report deviations from the protocol. There are only annual reports. But we know that there are all kinds of ethical dilemmas that come up in the field once we start collecting that data, analyzing that data, figuring out what are we going to do with the data and the results that are being produced. And so our broader ethical considerations module is really a complement. We have one that focuses on the IRB in disaster research, but then we recognize there's all these ethical landmines, as we call them, that fall outside the purview of the IRB. So we wanted to have a module on that. And so in this module, we actually present real scenarios to users. And so one of these is drawn from an article that I wrote with Kate Brown based on our long-term field research after Hurricane Katrina that we both conducted. And we have this scenario in the module where we ask users to think about whether disproportionate gift giving. So as many of you know, IRBs oftentimes you can get approved for, yes, you can give one $25 gift card to each participant who does a survey, and no more, no less. But as anybody who's ever done long-term field research knows, that oftentimes you get to know families, you become embedded in networks. Okay, I'm going to bring dinner over to this family. I'm going to buy school supplies for this family because you're learning about different needs and so forth. And so the question we raise for the users is disproportionate gift giving. So giving more to one participant who may have greater needs than another, is that ever ethically acceptable? So we do a lot of things like this in the module where, again, we present the research literature, but we also have case studies, vignettes, and other things to try to get users really thinking about what is and is not acceptable, what would I do or what would I not do in the field. And again, these are great for sparking classroom discussion. Oh, sorry. And so here, Dr. Zhang, one more shout out to you with the cyber training that you are launching. I think one of the other very important things that I have learned over the years being in this field and just seeing so many incredible initiatives and programs being launched, but then you get to the end and somebody inevitably raises their hand and says, okay, this is really neat, but how do you know it worked? Did you evaluate the impact? And I've heard that countless times in my career, and it's influenced me. And so from the beginning with these modules, one of the things that we've embedded every single module before users even begin, they take a very short 3-question pre-test of assessing their knowledge, skills, and attitudes related to the topic of interest. And then once they've completed the 30 or so minute module, then there's a post-test asking again about knowledge, skills, and attitudes around the topic. And so over the years, we've collected both administrative data, so we know who is taking our module. So when you register for the modules, you fill out all kinds of things related to what is your discipline and so forth. So we know, I'm actually very proud of this, that about a quarter of our completions are from social scientists, which makes a lot of sense. But then we also have lots of other disciplines represented: emergency management, education, public health, engineering, medicine, nursing, natural sciences, humanities, law, business, and the formal sciences. So we track who is doing these modules. We also know that about 70% of our users are students, which is, again, exactly our core, one of our core demographics we were really seeking out. We've reached, most of our module participants are in the United States, but we have actually reached people from dozens and dozens of countries as well. So we track this kind of information administratively so we can understand the reach and so forth. Since 2019, we've had over 9,000 unique registrants for these modules, and they've completed over 11,600 successful completions. And we do know that most people are only completing 1 to 2 modules. And we think that's because, again, they're students, they're taking them for a class. And so something we're trying to figure out moving forward how do we integrate this in more systematically so that people are taking more and more of the modules and building their knowledge base? And so again, with this commitment to evaluation, not only do we collect the administrative data internally and really track that carefully, we've also published 3 evaluation specific articles on these training modules. And so we have one where we evaluated the very first module, the social vulnerability and disasters. Our second module we rolled out is on disaster mental health. We also published an article on that. And then recently we published sort of an overview article explaining the why, the how, the what, the when, the where of these training modules. So giving that kind of background and tying it into a technology transfer special issue. And just last but not least, I just wanted to say this too. And one more shout out to Dr. Zhang, that as you're creating your trainings, one of the things that we realized was that there are all these additional sort of supplementary resources that we're creating. So for example, I mentioned earlier, there is an annotated bibliography that's available for every single one of these modules. And I said to my team, I said, I want to publish these bibliographies because we're spending all this time compiling the state of the literature so we can write the modules. I could imagine undergraduates, graduate students, they will want this maybe for their reading lists, or if they're doing work in the same vein as one of our modules, they can go to the annotated bibliography, and we do update these as new knowledge comes out, and we can update the modules too because they're online. And secondly, we have sample assignments. So one of the things I started to realize when I looked at the registrations, I was like, oh, professors are requiring these. And so I started reaching out to colleagues and saying, you know what, would you send me the assignment that you're using when you require this module or that module? Because I thought that might help other professors in the future. And so we also put assignments up there on the website. We have a list of resources that we publish with every single module, as I mentioned, that are things like tools, instruments, trainings, web resources, data, and so forth. And then we also have this entire check sheet series that are brief check sheets that are meant to help researchers who are new to conducting research, and they deal with everything from how do you do a lit review, how do you review a grant proposal, how do you ethically conduct an in-depth interview, and so forth. So all these things are free, and they're all on the Converge website. And with that, we now have 9 minutes left for questions or comments or anything like that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can see all of you. And I would love it if anybody has a question or a comment or anything you'd like to share. And thank you again for having me this morning.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Peak. So questions, please. You can unmute yourself or you can post questions in the chat box.
So Dr. Peak, thank you for your wonderful presentation. My name is Hung Gao Li. I'm one of the co-PI work with Dr. Zhang on the cyber training project.
Yes.
You mentioned your training module, you already integrate with the International Association of Emergency Managers, that
Yes.
certificate program. How valuable this certificate program, and also can you share your experience how you work with this mainly organization to mainly to work with them? They accept the training module as their certificate, and so that probably can help us for this cyber training grant.
Oh, thank you for asking that. That is a wonderful question. It's great to see you, Hong Dao. Thank you for being here and paying such careful attention. So you are right. And I will back up a little bit and say the idea to get that one contact hour for each training was actually rooted in every summer at the Hazards Workshop. We've actually partnered with IAEM, so the International Association of Emergency Managers, as well as the Association of State Floodplain Managers and the American Planning Association. All 3 of those groups, they offer continuing education credits to practitioners who are seeking this continuing education. And so we actually offer continuing education through the hazards workshop. And so I got to thinking, is there any way we could automate this? So literally IAEM has been amazing. They reviewed the modules. They said, yeah, we think each one should be worth 1 contact hour. And then now we have a little symbol that's on every single certificate. And so it's literally seamless that once they approved us for it, we put it on the training certificate that people receive after they complete after they successfully complete the 10-question quiz at the end, and they get the contact hour. So it's very low touch, low work. It was just cultivating that relationship early on. And I love your thought. And mine was rooted in, okay, we are attracting a lot of students, but how could we also bring in those practitioners, emergency managers who may need these skills, want these skills, but what's their incentive? A student, maybe they're getting course credit. What's the incentive for an emergency manager? And so that was kind of the drive, because we wanted to up participants in that realm. So I love your idea. And I think thinking about who are the groups who may want to offer this continuing education credit for the training you're offering, and then reach out directly. And if IAEM is one that you're interested in, I'm happy to make the introduction, because they're great.
That'd be wonderful. Thank you. I think if you can share or introduce us to them, I think that'd be really useful for the project in the long run.
Thank you.
I have another quick question for
Yes.
mainly curious, since you mentioned this kind of disaster perishable data. Is there actually, since you may collect a lot of data, that some data is digital data, but some may not. So is there like a national organization or national data repository to host this kind of disaster perishable data?
Yeah,
I think that's
absolutely.
valuable, definitely valuable. But
Yes, so I love that you asked this, and there are actually a couple of, so one of the things we've compiled on the Converge website are what are the different data sources out there, from federal agencies and so forth that focus on social vulnerability or disaster losses. So these are sort of secondary data sets. And if you go to the Converge website under the data tab, we've done that. But to your question about where are we putting this perishable data, and this is really important because based on recent guidance from the White House, every single federally funded project by 2025, and here I'm quoting from the memo, must make their findings and their data free and immediately available. And so I am so pleased to say Design Safe is the national science, as Tim gave a presentation on this. So that's where predominantly our EERs, the Extreme Events Research Networks, we use Design Safe. That's where we put our data. And in fact, just yesterday, I published an instrument up there with my grad student team and a new data set on children and COVID-19. And so that's where is really the go-to I think, the natural hazards community. And I know Tim did a great presentation on that. So I would say Design Safe for the new data, legacy data sets, et cetera. And then we have compiled other major federal data sources. Thank you.
Thank you
Very much. And
Great.
I see that, I hope I'm saying this right, Jikun?
Yes, I have a question. There is a question from a student.
And so this question is wonderful and said, I'm a PhD. I'll just read it in case anybody's listening. I'm a PhD geography student. I'm very enthusiastic, yay, about knowing more about disaster vulnerability and environmental justice, but I have limited prior knowledge. What would you recommend some first steps as a researcher to get to know the field better? This is a fabulous question. Thank you for asking it. And I will say it's a very important question, because one of the things that we know is that the environmental justice field, which is so thriving and vital, and then the hazard sort of social vulnerability field, in some ways they've kind of developed in tandem. And I won't say they're stovepipe, because there's definitely research that has crossed the two containers, but I will say they have sort of developed in tandem. But there are some really good articles. Stephanie Malin, Malin, and Stacia Ryder, Ryder, have written some pieces trying to merge together the environmental justice, climate justice, and hazards and disaster vulnerability research. So I would recommend their work as kind of a starting point, but also I do think on the social vulnerability container, I would love it if you start with doing the module and looking at the reading list is a great starting place. And I will say with the reading list, there's so much on social vulnerability and disasters that we have already culled it down to a set number of readings because there's just such a robust body of knowledge out there, but always more to be done. Thank you. That's a wonderful question.
We have another question from undergrad GST students. This student is pursuing a career in the army of the school. I was wondering, having you or someone you know work together with people in the military so far, because I know that the military is moving towards more work like this in certain tasks.
What a great question. I actually was at a meeting this week, and I heard that the first military base in the nation has gone net zero. That, you know, and so, right, the military is thinking, I mean, that gives me goosebumps. They are thinking about climate change. They're thinking about, absolutely thinking about displacement, climate change induced conflict, about you know, instability in various regions of the world, including in our own nation, related to climate related changes. It is a great question, and I'm going to tell you the honest to goodness truth. I am actually, off the top of my head, am not aware of anybody who is doing research in this area, and that does not mean it doesn't exist, but I will tell you, from where I sit at the Natural Hazard Center, wow, do we see a lot of work come through at the workshop every year, and the literature we read and review every day. And so I haven't seen a lot of work in this area. I am definitely going to pursue it, and I would say this would be an amazing, if it's something you're really interested in, see if there's anything out there, and if there's not, stake your flag in the sand, because I think it sounds like a really hot and important topic. Yeah, thank you for asking.
Thank you. And I think we are now running out of time. Do we have more questions? If not, I think we can close today's webinar. And let's thank you again, Dr. Laurie Peak, for your wonderful presentation. It's really valuable for all our students and researchers and any people who doing disaster management. And thank you so much. And thank you for the participants. Thank you for your time. And have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care.
Yeah, bye.
Very nice. Thank you. And then do you want to stop the recording and then talk about the workshop a little this summer?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. That was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for having me.